All right, 6.2, factoring trinomials, 3, whose leading coefficient is 1. So here we have a trinomial. The x squared is the leading coefficient, the leading term, so the 1 in front of it would be the leading coefficient. So factoring these is the reverse of FOIL, multiplication. First, x squared, outside, 3x, inside, 2x, and last, positive 6. Then you combine your like terms and you get your 5x. So now we're going to be factoring, we're going to be reversing that. So this last term comes from this multiplication here. So it's very important with the sign and what it is. So two numbers that multiply to 6 but combine to 5, because this term comes from adding these two terms. So two numbers whose product is 6 and the sum is 2 and 3 is how we factor it out. So I have just set up my two parentheses. It's already done here for me. Break up my first term. I have to know what my signs are going to be. They're both going to be positive when they're both positive. Two numbers that multiply to 6 that add to 5. My only possible outcomes are 1 and 6 and 2 and 3. These add to 5, and that is my answer. The order of the binomials does not matter. So it's important to know what signs to put in your two sets of parentheses, and it is based off the C because that comes from that last multiplication. Up here, these last two terms, so if they're the same sign, C is positive. If this is positive, that means they're both positive. If the C is positive, it means they're the same sign. So if this is negative, they're both negative. When C is negative, it's going to be one of each sign. So have this sign chart out when you're first learning this until you memorize the signs, because without knowing your signs first, you're not going to be able to factor. So let's do one. Here I have a trinomial whose leading coefficient's 1. I'm going to set up my two parentheses, break up my first term. C is positive, B is positive, so both my signs are positive. I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 10. Those are my only factor pairs, but that add to 7. So it's 5 and 2 or 2 and 5. It doesn't matter the order you put it in because they're both positive. So the signs matter, not the order. Here I have a trinomial. My leading coefficient, it's the leader because of the x squared, is 1. Two sets of parentheses. Break up this first term. Break up the x. X times x is x squared. When C is positive, they're going to be the same sign. If this B is negative, they're both negative. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 16 but combine to 10. Now, when they're the same sign, you're adding. They're both negative. You're going to add it up. Your answer is negative. So I'm looking for two numbers that add to 10. And it's going to be 8 and 2. Multiply to positive 16, combine to negative 10. Here, trinomial, leading coefficient's 1. Two sets of parentheses. Break up my x. Both same sign, both positive. 1 times 4 and 2 times 2 are my only options. Two numbers that they both multiply to 4, but I need them to add to 5. And I say add because they're the same sign. They're going to add to positive 5. Here, let's break up my parentheses. Break up my first term, sorry. When C is negative, I'm going to have one of each sign. So I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to 18. But they're going to subtract to 3. Because think about it, when I'm combining opposite signs, it's going to be subtraction. So this is going to be subtracting to 3. But now it matters which one has which sign. If my leftover is negative, the larger one has to be negative. And now look, they multiply to negative 18 and they combine to negative 3. Negative 6 plus positive 3 is the difference of those, and the negative wins, negative 3. Here, we'll keep going. Okay, 2 sets of parentheses, break up my y. 2 numbers that multiply to 4 and combine to a negative 3. So this c is negative, so I have one of each sign. So they're going to subtract to 3. So it has to be the 4 and the 1. My leftover is negative, the larger has to be negative. Now, positive 1 minus 4 is negative 3. 1 times negative 4 is negative 4. Let's keep going. 2 sets of parentheses, break up my first term. One of each sign because c is negative. 1 times 45, 3 times 15, 5 times 9. Okay, I'm looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 45 but subtract to positive 4. It's going to be these. My leftover is positive. The larger one has to be positive. They combine to positive 4 and they multiply to negative 45. Okay, go to factor. 2 sets of parentheses. Break up your t. One of each sign. 2 numbers that multiply to 6. I only have these options. But subtract to positive 1. So it's going to be these 2. That would subtract to 5. My leftover is positive. The larger one has to be positive. So they combine to positive 1, multiply to negative 6. Factor this trinomial. 2 sets of parentheses. X, c is positive. It's the same sign. They're both positive. So I'm looking for 2 numbers, that multiply to 4, but add to 6. This multiplies to 4, but it adds to 5. This multiplies to 4, but it adds to 4. I have to really be comfortable with my signs, but this, with that being positive, is not factorable. There are no combinations that add to 6. Okay, so this trinomial here, you'll notice the leading coefficient's not 2. So the first thing you would need to do is check to see if you have a GCF. You do. All these coefficients are divisible by 2. I'm going to pull a 2 out. 2 times what gets me 2x squared. 2 times what gets me negative 10x minus 5x. 2 times what gets me negative 48, negative 24. It's important that this is a separate step. Then I'm going to factor the trinomial. Break up my x, 1 of each sign, bring down my 2 if I need to. 2 numbers that multiply to 24. That subtract to negative 5. The difference between 8 and 3 is 5. The leftover is negative, so the larger one has to be negative. And now it's factored completely. If my trinomial is not in order, I need to put it in order. The x squared is positive 1 in front of it. It stays that way. The x term goes second. And the constant goes last. Just the number. So now it's in order. And my leading coefficient is 1. So I can go ahead and factor. Break it up. Same sign, both negative. 2 numbers that multiply to 14 that add to 9. Here, I don't want my leading coefficient to be negative, so I'm going to factor a negative 1 out of all of these terms. Basically, everything's just going to be the opposite sign. Then I'm going to factor my trinomial, break up my x, 1 of each sign. 2 numbers that multiply to 11 that subtract to 10, my only options. My leftover is positive, so the 11 has to be positive, and I have factored completely.